Sling TV has something for everyone. It really just depends on what kind of mood you're in. But no matter what you're looking for, you can watch it with Sling. Sports, news, and today's hottest shows. Plus, you can explore thousands of movies and TV shows on demand. And getting Sling is easy. Sign up and start watching in just 5 minutes. Stream on any device and record up to 50 hours with your included DVR space. Plus, you won't get locked into a long-term contract. Check out sling.com for special offers. Sling, the TV you love for a price you'll love. Try it today. Welcome to the Andy Staples Show presented by Sling. It is three people who have to pack after we're done with this show. I'm here. Austin Meek, the Athletics Michigan beat writer, is here. And Sam Kahn Jr., our techspert, is here. We're talking Fiesta Bowl, Michigan and TCU. This one's going to be a fun one. You guys are headed to Phoenix tomorrow, and the teams have just gotten out there. This is really crazy. Austin, I want to talk to you about this because this is your second year covering a playoff team, and I think the vibe feels very different for Michigan this year. What do you think they learned from that first experience in the playoff?
Yeah, it does feel completely different. At this time last year, I didn't know anybody around Michigan fans or anybody who was making travel reservations for the national championship game. And that's the vibe around Michigan this year is that it's not just happy to be back in the playoff. You know, it's not just like it was last year, nice story for Michigan to have this, magical season where they win the Big Ten. Finally, they get to the playoff and then they face this juggernaut from Georgia. And there's a sense of, obviously they went into that game wanting to win it. But I think they understood that it was a massive accomplishment for that team last year just to get to the Orange Bowl. And for this team, from day one, really, they said it was not just about getting back to the playoff. It was about winning a national championship. That's what this team laid out as its number one goal. It's what Jim Harbaugh said when he came back to Michigan after looking at the NFL. So, for this team, they've really kind of embraced that idea that they're, not going to this game to like soak up the experience and have fun in the playoff and, enjoy Arizona. It's all about, a business trip for them. They want to win this game and they want to get to SoFi Stadium on January 9th and try to win the whole thing.
So there's not a bowl trip to go meet Ari Wasserman's dad or anything on the books. There's strictly a work trip.
There should be somebody with the Michigan Alumni Association should have set that up, but I don't think so. No.
So how much, I would imagine that game against Georgia was pretty educational last year, and they came in obviously with a different goal. How much of having to getting to play, having to play, however you want to say it, the eventual national champion, seeing how good you have to be, how much did that help kind of guide them in the offseason and into this season?
A lot. I think it helped a lot. It showed them where they need to be if they want to win a national championship, because for that whole season, Michigan was up to every challenge in front of them until they faced Georgia. Then they realized this is a whole different animal. And they did have to get better in a few areas if they wanted to try to get on that level. I think that was part of the quarterback change with J.J. McCarthy taking over for Cade McNamara. They realized that they needed to be more dynamic at quarterback. I think they realized their offensive line was really good last year against every team they played until they faced Georgia's defensive line. And then they realized that they could get better up front too. And defensively, I think some of the things that they've done this year as well have put them in position to hopefully, in the way that they think about it, they wanted another shot at Georgia and they feel like they're better equipped to handle that challenge this year. Careful what you wish for. We'll see if it happens, but that's how they look at it.
Well, they got to get there first. And Sam, a year ago this time, Sonny Dykes is just starting as TCU's coach. It was the worst kept secret in the world that he was going to get that job. And we were 9 months away from Max Duggan becoming the starting quarterback because he was not the opening day starter. That was Chandler Morris. How much of this is still a surprise and a shock to everybody at TCU that they're even here right now?
Yeah, I think it is. When I spent the day when they got selected, the day after they lost the conference championship game there, and I was talking to a couple of guys on staff, and we're saying, man, if I'd have told you, if we'd have said back in September or August that you're going to be here, none of them would have believed it. I think they thought in August they would be a better team than most people thought. I think they were picked 7th in the preseason Big 12 poll. But better than expected was, hey, 8, 9, maybe 10 games. Maybe if everything goes right, maybe you get into the Big 12 championship game. You do that, smashing success. Or if you go to I think I talked to someone says, if you go to the Cotton Bowl, so you go to one of those New Year's Six bowls, smashing success in year one for Sonny Dykes. And here we are in the playoff now, which is, I think, well surpasses anybody's expectations. And I say that this is not a team that necessarily came out of nowhere from a talent standpoint, because I do believe that the talent has always been there. Not necessarily to be a playoff team, but to be a very good team, to be a top 25 team. They've been third in the team talent composite in the Big 12 the last 6-7 years. They've recruited well. And that was why last year, going into the season, I thought they would be a team that could be a dark horse Big 12 championship team. And then, of course, they went 5-7 and moved on from Gary Patterson. But I thought the talent was there. It was just a matter of being able to utilize that talent the best way possible. I think that's the thing that Sonny Dykes and his staff have done. They've really taken advantage of the assets they have on the field and then done a pretty good job of supplementing it with some of the additions they made in the offseason.
And in the meantime, between getting selected and now, Max Duggan has declared for the NFL draft, but obviously he's playing in the playoff. I imagine that changes some things behind the scenes in terms of recruiting, development, portal, all of that stuff. But does it change anything on the field?
No, I don't think so. This was Max's senior year. He just graduated this month. So
right.
I think a lot of people thought, even though he had the extra year, I think there was some hope that he might, holding out that maybe he might come back and give it another run. But I don't think anybody was surprised by the fact that he's going to go ahead and go for the draft now while his stock is the highest. And it's been a miraculous story, obviously, to see how far he's come to get to this point. But let's not forget that he wasn't the starter coming out of camp. It was Chandler Morris. And so he's still on the roster. They're going to have to see, does he want to hang around, and go for this again next year and reclaim the starting job? They're certainly going to look in the portal. They didn't sign a quarterback in the 23 class out of high school, so they'll probably look in the portal for one. And but as far as on the field, no, it's not going to change. If anything, I think these last few weeks have probably been good for Max Duggan because he got beat up pretty good down the stretch physically. And I know everybody saw in the Big 12 championship game how exhausted he was at the end there. There was nobody, I think, that needed more rest than that guy at the end of the regular season.
6 more inches, and it might have been completely different. He looked pretty tired at the end of that play, for sure. Yeah. So, Austin, the quarterback situation at Michigan is the most fascinating aspect of the season for me, because as you pointed out, you said maybe the Georgia game last year helped influence Jim Harbaugh's decision-making process there. And I remember when he announced the way he was going to, was it whose podcast was it? Was it John Runyon? It was a former
John Jansen. Yeah.
It was John Jansen.
Right. The color guy, former Michigan player.
Yeah. Former Michigan offensive lineman. It was on his podcast, and Harbaugh is a week before the season starts. And Harbaugh is like, okay, here's how it's going to go. Cade's going to start the first game. JJ's going to start the second game. And then we are going to make a final decision, and that person will be the guy. It felt, and Ari and I remember the first show we did after that news broke, we said, this feels like they're moving to JJ. This feels like the plan is to move to JJ because he gives them maybe a higher ceiling. And I feel like we didn't see that all year because they didn't need it. And then when they did need it against Ohio State, you're like, whoa, this guy was a 5-star for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we saw it really early, like in those non-conference games, like in the game when JJ won the starting job against Hawaii. Like, he brought an element in that game that we hadn't seen from a Michigan quarterback really during Jim Harbaugh's entire tenure. But it was Hawaii, and you're like, okay, we need to see it against a Big Ten defense. And we didn't see it for a lot of the year until, like you said, we got to that Ohio State game. And, it was great psychology because Ohio State got pounded by Michigan last year. And they were like, the one thing we're going to do in this game is we are not going to let Michigan run it all over us. Well, then Blake Corum gets hurt. Michigan's got to throw it more than they had anyway. And Michigan, found a weakness in Ohio State and exploited it. And, JJ had struggled connecting on the deep balls all season. But when you got a guy with no defender within 10 yards of him, those throws are a little bit easier. He had a couple of those against Ohio State. So, it was an up and down season for JJ, but definitely in that game, we saw why Michigan did that ultimately, which wasn't easy, to bench a guy who had led you to your best season in 20 years. But we saw why they did that in that Ohio State game.
The Cornelius Johnson thing, was that common, or was that just a surprise to everybody in the Ohio State game?
I mean, he'd shown that at times. Michigan, we talked about that receiving core at Michigan as being like maybe the best receiving core that Jim Harbaugh had between Cornelius Johnson, Ronnie Bell, Roman Wilson. And frankly, that unit was a little bit of a disappointment for a lot of this season. They hadn't made as many big plays as we thought they might. So in that sense, it had been coming. Like we knew that was a talented receiver group, and they'd just been off. The timing just hadn't quite been there with JJ all season. But they kept saying, and I started to kind of lose faith in this, but they kept saying, like, we really think that this is going to hit at some point this season. They ended up being right in the biggest game of the year.
It is amazing. And we talk about the offensive line. It's the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. Oluwatimi might be the biggest impact transfer in the country other than Caleb Williams. But it felt like until the skill guys really showed up that it wasn't complete. And that's what the other thing about JJ, Austin, that I found interesting in that Ohio State game is so Blake tries to go, it's clear he can't go. Donovan Edwards is playing with a club. He's struggling to find his groove early on. JJ carried the running game till the middle of the third quarter. That's where I feel like he could really help them against TCU and if they advance.
Yeah, and that was a big part of the quarterback change, was that J.J. McCarthy brings an element in the running game that Michigan just didn't have with Cade McNamara. A lot of what Michigan has done the last 2 years is influenced by the Ravens. Matt Weiss, Michigan's quarterbacks coach, came from the Ravens and brought some stuff that the Ravens do with Lamar Jackson. And obviously J.J. McCarthy is not Lamar Jackson, but he can run. I mean, he's fast. And that opened something up in their playbook that they just didn't really have. And I think, going back to the Georgia game last year, I think that was one of their lessons, is that to have a quarterback who can do some things with his legs against a defense like that is really useful. They didn't show that a ton during the season. They did at times, and JJ just improvised some plays. But it's nice to have that in your back pocket if you get into a game where maybe you're struggling to run the ball, you need a spark, and you can turn to your quarterback to do that.
So, Sam, I got a question about TCU's quarterback from the chat from Elias Gray. Did Duggan do more with less around him than any other Heisman contender? We know he has an elite receiver in Quentin Johnston and some good backs. But you mentioned the talent composite. And we've talked about Gary Patterson, how good he was at identifying people and getting them to TCU, and then you develop them into what you develop them into. And it feels like Sonny Dykes and his staff did a good job with that. But what is around Max Duggan? Start with Quentin Johnston, but explain to the folks who maybe didn't see a lot of TCU this year what he has at his disposal, because it's more than people think.
Yeah, they do. They have, first, I think they returned 4 starting offensive linemen this year. So they had a lot of experience up front, which was a good sign. That was one thing that I think Sonny Dykes felt really good about coming into the year, is like, hey, we've got a lot of experience up front. So that's where you start. And then the skill positions, that's where I say that I looked at this team from a talent standpoint the last few years, wondering why they didn't do more. They got a ton of speed. You mentioned Quentin Johnston, who's a future NFL receiver. You got Darius Davis, who's one of the best all-around guys, I think, in the country. He's a punt return threat, kick return threat. I think he's tied the school record for return touchdowns in his career. He's the guy they use on fly sweeps. They can throw it to him downfield as well. They got a couple other veteran receivers. Tay Barber has been around for several years.
Gunnar Henderson, who's never met a DB who couldn't lose him in coverage and standing there 30 yards down the field waving his hand at Max Duggan.
Oklahoma lost him once for sure, and I think he caught like a 67-yard touchdown against the Sooners. That was Gunnar Henderson's unveiling to the world in 2022. And then they've got some good backs. Kendre Miller, legitimately one of the best backs in the Big 12, one of the better backs in the country. It's over 1,000 yards this year, and Amari DiMercato, who I think is a fifth-year guy behind him. Kendray's a guy who started to get reps last year when Zach Evans, who was there, got hurt, missed some games. So Kendray started to become a go-to guy for them last year, but Zach Evans was the guy. Then, of course, Zach transfers to Ole Miss, and Kendray becomes the number one full-time and really has been, to me, the go-to guy for them, because when they've made these comebacks in games they've been down in the second half, they haven't gotten away from the run. He's actually averaged more carries per game in the second half than he did in the first half in these comeback games. So they've been a team that's stuck with a run and kind of eaten the chains and been able to stay with their game plan as they've gone on. So Max has got a lot around him. Certainly they're not going to have as much as some of the top 5 teams in the country in terms of depth, but their first team talent over in skill position is pretty good overall.
All right, when we come back, we got a really good question about division of labor on the Michigan coaching staff that I want to pose to Austin. We're going to talk about that when we come back. Sling TV has something for everyone. All your favorite shows on your favorite channels, all right at your fingertips. What you watch is up to you. It really just depends on what kind of mood you're in. So if you're looking for sports, Sling's got you covered with pro and college football and basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer, golf, racing, and so much more. Sling also has reality TV, so you can keep up with the latest gossip with today's hottest shows on channels like TLC, Bravo, MTV, and more. And don't forget about news. Get up to date with today's most trusted sources like MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. Feeling adventurous? Explore thousands of movies and shows on demand. So what kind of mood are you in? No matter your answer, Sling has what you need. Getting Sling is easy. Sign up and start watching in just 5 minutes. You can stream on any device, and you can record up to 50 hours with your included DVR space. And the best part, you can pause or customize your subscription at any time. So check out sling.com for special offers. Sling, the TV you love for a price you'll love. Try it today. You're going to make some resolutions this week, and one of those, I guarantee it, is going to be you're going to work out more and you're going to stick to it. But it's hard to stick to. I know that. It was very hard for me until about 2 years ago when I joined the Peloton family. And now I feel like I'm working out with my friends and they're pushing me through this. I don't know Andy Spear or Adrian Williams or Selena Samuela, but it feels like they know me. And it feels like they know how to push my buttons and make sure that I am working as hard as I can to be the best, most fit person I can be. And here's the thing. You're probably thinking, Peloton, that's the bike thing. Well, I don't do the bike very often. I like the treadmill. I like the boot camp classes. I like the weights. I like the yoga. I've done the boxing. They've got something for everybody. You can mix it up. They've got great music. The personalities of the trainers will help you kind of figure out, oh, I like this person. This person works for me. And it'll make you excited to open that app and say, oh, they got something new for me. This is going to be awesome. I'm telling you, you'll be able to stick to it this time. So try Peloton risk-free with a 30-day home trial. It's for new members only. It's not available in remote locations. You can see additional terms at onepeloton.com/home-trial. But give it a try. I'm telling you right now, it'll be the easiest resolution you ever kept. Welcome back. We have a very good question in the chat, just from R to Austin. So Jerome Moore and Matt Weiss, the co-offensive coordinators at Michigan. Jerome Moore is the offensive line coach, and Weiss works with the quarterbacks. But what is the division of labor? The way R asked the question is, who pulls the strings? And it is a really good question, because this is, we've seen this offense evolve. Obviously, Josh Gaddis was there last year, but toward the end of the year, you saw more influence from Jerome Moore. But where is it now, and how does that work between those two?
Yeah, well, to go back to last year, so Sharon Moore was the co-offensive coordinator last year, but it was kind of understood that Josh Gaddis was the play caller, and Sharon Moore was just there in kind of a supporting role with Josh Gaddis. Josh Gaddis goes to Miami, and it really was portrayed as Sharon Moore and Matt Weiss are collaborating all the time on the play call. So the way it was explained to me, like Matt Weiss might call down from the booth a few options, and then Sharon Moore is down on the sideline and might pick one. Sharon's going to be more involved with the run game and the offensive line. Matt Weiss more involved with quarterbacks and the passing game. And there was some skepticism, like, is this really going to work? Like, do you have too many cooks in the kitchen here with two guys involved in the play calling? And then Jim Harbaugh's very involved on the offensive side of the ball too. But it's actually worked, I think, pretty well the whole season. They've been a pretty well-oiled machine on offense. And I think a lot of the credit does go to Sharon Moore, who, since he took over that offensive line, they've just hit another level with that group. And it's really been the foundation of their offense.
Yeah, and Jim Harbaugh has said he's more than ready to be a head coach. Michigan probably lucky that he can afford to be really picky right now, because he's probably a Power 5 head coach is his next job. So it just depends on when that is. And speaking of that, TCU has a somewhat similar situation. Now, Sonny Dykes, historically a play caller, but he's got Garrett Riley as his offensive coordinator. Garrett Riley, the younger brother of Lincoln Riley. And Sam, how does that work? Is it Garrett calling the plays explicitly, but Sonny obviously has veto power because he's the head coach?
Yeah, so this is Garrett's show. Yeah, Garrett's been the guy, and they have a good relationship. Obviously, they work together at SMU, but Sonny obviously is an offensive guy, so he's got input, and obviously he's the head coach, so things can go the way he wants it. But this is Garrett's show, has been, and like you said about Sharon, is Garrett's a guy who's going to be looked at for jobs. Obviously has been a name that has floated out for some jobs.
Got looked at for one, and looked at it and was like, no thanks. That'd be the Texas A&M OC job.
Yeah, and then I think he was a name that was bandied about for the North Texas head coaching job as well. So they obviously ended up going with Eric Morris, the Washington State offensive coordinator, who's got some head coaching experience. But Garrett's a guy whose name's going to be out there for the next year or two. He just obviously was a Broyles Award winner actually. So. Done a tremendous job both at SMU with Sonny and now at TCU, but he's done a fantastic job. And I think the biggest compliment I can give to Garrett Riley is the difference that you see in Max Duggan. This is a quarterback who started 3 years before he got there, and you look at his accuracy, his footwork, you see the way he goes to progressions, and a lot of that is attributed to Garrett Riley's coaching. Is the way he's worked with him to improve him in so many facets to where he's hit career highs and everything this year.
Are there other Riley family members that are excellent at working with quarterbacks?
Not that I'm aware of at this point.
So, Austin, I did want to ask you, speaking of which, because this family coaching thing does fascinate me. And the family coaching thing with Michigan is the Jim and John situation. John Harbaugh, obviously the head coach of the Ravens. And basically, John Harbaugh loaned Jim Mike McDonald for a year as the defensive coordinator. And then that's where Matt Weiss came from. He was also on the Ravens staff. Jesse Mentor, who's the current defensive coordinator, was at Vandy last year, but had been with the Ravens before that. So how much of that has it created like a farm system where the Ravens essentially send these folks to Jim to show what they can do, and then they come back? Because Mike McDonald is the current Ravens defensive coordinator.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of cross pollination with those two organizations. Jesse Mentor was a candidate for the defensive coordinator job before they hired Mike McDonald. They ended up going with McDonald, but I think that it was probably everybody had in their mind that at some point Mike McDonald would go back to the NFL, that was where he wanted to be. And at that time, Jesse Mentor was the defensive coordinator at Vanderbilt. So it was a pretty seamless transition for him to come into Michigan after Mike McDonald left. There have been a lot of players, support staffers, people going back and forth between those two organizations. And then, of course, Jim Harbaugh's son, Jay Harbaugh, is also on the staff and that has been actually a really excellent special teams coordinator. So a lot of Harbaugh connections there.
And doesn't Jay also work with the tight ends?
Yeah, he's been all over the place. He worked with tight ends. He's been on defense, safeties now. He's basically like the utility guy on their staff where whatever they need somebody to do, he just kind of does it.
Well, let's talk about the two defenses because, Michigan, up front last year had the elite talent in Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo. They're a little tougher up the middle now than they are on the edge. But then they've got, I think the secondary is really good. I'm still kind of blown away by the Mikey Sanderstill play from the Ohio State game. Like, that guy was a receiver 2 years ago. How good has this defense been since Don Brown leaves and the Ravens defense gets put in?
Yeah, it's been a night and day. transformation on that side of the ball. I mean, I think there was a belief coming off of 2 straight years of just getting destroyed by Urban Meyer and Ohio State in that game, that, a lot of people were saying like Michigan just doesn't have the talent on defense to hang with really elite offenses. And, there was a belief that like they actually, if they had the right system, that they had the players that they could hang in a game like that. And they were able to prove that, and then, last year they have those 2 really dynamic edge rushers, and the narrative was kind of like, well, those 2 guys were really the key to the defense, along with Dax Hill, who's also in the NFL. So there's really a thought that, if Jesse Minter could just get 75, 80% out of that defense of what they got last year, that he'd be doing a really good job. But they've way exceeded that. They've been, basically as good, or in some areas better defensively than they were last year. And I don't think they're as talented on defense as they were last year. So it's been a really impressive coaching job by him in his first year.
Meanwhile, Joe Gillespie, product of Stephenville, Texas. And we hear a lot about the coaches who come out of the high school ranks or spend a lot of time in the high school ranks before entering the college ranks. But this is Joe's first Power 5 defense, and pretty damn good one. Like when you get into a rock fight with Texas and you hold them 1.7 yards a carry and basically win that game on that side of the ball, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, no, this is probably the most impressive aspect and most surprising aspect to me of TCU this year, is how well their defense has played, given that it's not just a scheme change, but it's a mentality change. I mean, remember, this is a team that had operated under the Gary Patterson 4-2-5 for 2 decades. And granted, these current players haven't done it for 2 decades, but there's a certain style of defense that has been played at TCU. And to go to Gillespie's 3-3-5, that was my biggest question. We visited a lot in the offseason. I was like, how are you going to get this to where you guys are playing well? You guys understand, how it goes. And I'll say from the very first game this year, and granted it was against Colorado, but how fast they played, how sound they played, how well they tackled right out of the gate, to me, for a first-year defense coordinator, was really impressive. And again, I go back to what I said earlier. They had talent. There was no question about that. They did lose some guys. They lost O'Shawn Mass to the portal, lost Kari Coleman to the portal, but they still had a lot of good, experienced guys. And I think Joe Gillespie's done a fantastic job of deploying those guys. You guys remember Tulsa's Zaven Collins, who,
oh yeah,
once upon a time we were talking about a potential Heisman candidate. What he did at Tulsa, and with guys like that, you figure when you get the talent that TCU has, the potential is there. It's just, to me, it's how fast it has come together has been the impressive part about it.
Well, and I'm interested to see this offense, this Michigan offense against this defense. The 3-3-5 is kind of viewed as the triple option of defenses. It's tough to figure out your fits at first in the run game for an offensive lineman, and you can study it as much as you want, but if they come out with a new look, it may take a little while to get that figured out. So, but these are some very smart offensive linemen at Michigan, so we'll see how quick they figure it out. One more break, but before we go, I want to talk to Austin about Jim Harbaugh and the future, because we saw what happened last year. There's more rumors percolating about him as NFL jobs open up. I'm curious to see what that actually means. We will talk about it when we return. Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer that has made parts for the International Space Station and the Mars rover. Well, now they're bringing that precision engineering to your shaving experience. If you're watching on the video feed right now, here is a Henson shaving razor. It looks decidedly old school, but as you just learned, it has some high-tech stuff in there. Razor blades are like diving boards. The longer the board, the more the wobble. The more wobble, the more nicks, cuts, and scrapes. A bad shave isn't a blade problem. It's an extension problem. But by using aerospace-grade CNC machines, Henson makes metal razors that extend just 0.0013 inches, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. That means it's a secure and stable blade with a vibration-free shave. And they're exactly right. Seriously, Henson Shaving wants the best razor, not the best razor business. That means no plastic, no subscriptions, no proprietary blades, and no planned obsolescence. The Henson razor works with standard dual-edge blades to give you that old-school shave with the benefits of new-school tech. Once you own a Henson razor, it's only about $3 to $5 per year to replace the blades. It's time to say no to subscriptions and yes to a razor that will last you a lifetime. Visit hensonshaving.com/Andy to pick the razor for you and use the code Andy, and you'll get 2 years worth of blades free with your razor. Just make sure to add them to your cart. It's 100 free blades when you head to hensonshaving.com. That's hensonshaving.com/Andy and use the code Andy. That's hensonshaving.com/Andy. All right, we are back. And so this time last year, Michigan goes to the playoff. They play Georgia, they lose. The next couple of weeks are all about Michigan and Jim Harbaugh and what's going to happen to him. Is he going to go to the NFL? He talks to the Vikings. It turns out he's not a shoo-in for the job. They wind up hiring Kevin O'Connell, and he comes back. And it doesn't feel like Michigan missed a beat. But now the Colts need somebody. Where did Jim Harbaugh play some of his most productive years in the NFL? Indianapolis. Mr. Irsay likes his Colts, his former Colts. Austin, what has Jim Harbaugh said about that? Because I know he got asked about it.
Yeah, somebody asked him on a Fiesta Bowl teleconference, and he was as definitive as he ever gets in saying that he would be back coaching Michigan next year, which is consistent with what he said since he signed that contract extension last February. It was a long month of January in Ann Arbor, Michigan last year, coming off the playoff, and everybody's tired. And then it literally went on. It was signing day. He was in the February signing day. Jim Harbaugh was in Minneapolis interviewing for the Vikings.
It was that day. Wow.
Oh boy.
Oh my goodness.
But I can't explain to you kind of all the inner workings of how he thinks about things, but the thing that has been said is that when Jim Harbaugh came to Michigan, he signed a 7-year contract, and he felt like he was going to coach his 7 years at Michigan. And then at that point, he was going to reevaluate and decide if he wanted to take one more shot at the NFL. So the vibe around Michigan has been, he wanted to explore that last year after his 7-year deal was up. He looked into it. Didn't work out. He's back, and now he's back for good. Jim Harbaugh has a way of keeping everybody on edge, on their toes. Everybody
he has no agent, so that they don't play like he doesn't play the game the way everybody else plays it. Which Sam, you've dealt with that with the coaching searches in the state of Texas. Like that game gets played a lot, but not by Jim Harbaugh. Like he just doesn't do that. But I was thinking about this. I always wonder how much of it was he looked at the Vikings and said that could work right away. Because if you look at it, they're the best team under a first-year coach, obviously. I mean, they're 12-3 right now. So, you look at Justin Jefferson and Kirk Cousins, and you're like, all right, I can work with this. I'm not sure there's a job out there. Like, Sam, you're in Houston. Like, if Lovie Smith gets fired, do you think Jim Harbaugh would want Texas' job? He's like, no, of course not.
No. Not with Davis Mills at quarterback. No offense.
It's going to be Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud, but still, it is Austin. I tend to believe him this time.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the jobs he was mentioned for last year, his name came up for the Raiders job. He ends up interviewing for the Vikings job. The jobs that he was connected with last year were situations where you could see a first-year coach coming in.
Raiders were in the playoffs, had a quarterback coming back. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. The Colts, I mean, Jim Harbaugh knows football. I'm sure he would look at that Colts roster and say, don't have a quarterback, got a lot of issues to fix on that roster. I mean, if his ultimate goal is to win a Super Bowl, coaches, obviously have utmost confidence in their ability to come into any situation and turn it around. But I got to think Jim Harbaugh, is aware that if his goal is to win a Super Bowl, that's a tough road to go into Indianapolis right now and win it. And he said that the national championship in college football is now his goal. Maybe if they win it this year, that changes something for him. But I got to think that if you ask me, who would you rather coach next year, whoever the Colts quarterback is, or third year of JJ McCarthy, I'd probably take JJ McCarthy.
Oh yeah. And by the way, listen to Prospects to Pros, the draft podcast I'm on. We have an episode later in the week where Dane Brugler and I go through all the draft prospects on the teams in the playoff. It's some very interesting words about JJ McCarthy, who obviously is not draft eligible this year, but let's just say Dane's a fan. So get ready for that. Sam, this is year one for Sonny Dykes and staff at TCU. It obviously was a seamless transition, other than everybody at SMU being mad about him leaving. But basically, he just had to drive across town to take the new job. It feels like this is sustainable, repeatable. What do they have to do to make sure they can stay in the mix for this sort of thing in the future?
Yeah, I think it's just continue to recruit at a high level. They just signed the class that ranks the highest in the modern era in TCU history. I think their class ranked 16th on Wednesday, which is higher than it's ever been. I think 21st was the highest it had ever been before this. So it's just number one, which is the blueprint that he has. Recruit the state of Texas, recruit DFW as heavily as you can, get as many high-level guys as you can, and then supplement that with the guys in the portal. He did a masterful job of that at SMU, getting guys in the portal. He's done a pretty good job of it so far. You see guys like Josh Newton, the corner, who's been a tremendous impact player for them this year. Lots of big-time transfers they brought in. That is pretty much the roster plan, and everything else I think is in place. When it comes to being the best team in this new Big 12 and then being competitive at a national level, the facilities are great. Their stadium is in really good shape. They did a renovation of the east side a few years ago. It looks flawless. They are going to upgrade the weight room. I think that's one thing that they're going to do here coming up in this next off season. But they've got deep-pocketed donors. They've got plenty of support. Their location is really good. Their recruiting footprint is really good. All you got to do is just keep getting the players. And obviously staff retention and things like that are going to be part of it. But you're going to lose some guys. Garrett Riley, maybe not this year, but at some point down the road is going to probably get a job. Joe Gillespie, if he keeps doing well, at some point is going to get a job. So it just comes down to Sonny Dykes hiring really good coaches and continuing to do that year in and year out. But overall, like you said, seeing where this program was under Gary Patterson for 2 decades, success at TCU is sustainable long term
and expected.
Yes, very much so. Which is why, I mean, to some degree, Gary Patterson became a victim of his own success, because they had stopped winning double-digit games. They had a 4-year run of 7 wins or fewer, and TCU suddenly decided that wasn't good enough. And they had never seen a run like that before. They'd never seen runs of double-digit win season and going to winning a Rose Bowl before Gary Patterson. So I guess you could go back to the Dutch Meyer here in the 30s, but I mean, we're talking in the modern era.
Fight him till hell freezes over, and after that, fight him on the ice.
Fight him on the ice.
One of the greatest quotes of all time. All right, Austin. Jim Harbaugh said after the Georgia game last year that the end of last season felt more like a beginning than an end. And it didn't really make sense at the time because he was going to go interview with the Vikings, but it makes a lot more sense now because it felt like the dawn of a new era for Michigan football. Do they have to win this game? Do they have to win a national title for that to continue? Or can they just say, hey, look, we're going to be here for a long time? Is that the plan?
I think this roster is set up for the immediate future to be good, not just this year, but I mean, next year, JJ McCarthy's back. Donovan Edwards is back. Will Johnson, who is coming into his own as a 5-star freshman cornerback, is going to be back and really good next year. So I think for the short-term future, Michigan is really set up to be good for a few years here. I don't think it's like if they don't win it all this year, then the window's closed. Looking beyond that, like 4 or 5 years out, there's going to be some challenges for Michigan. Their recruiting class that they just signed is not ranked as highly as most of Jim Harbaugh's classes have been.
Got to snag Nicholas Harbor and get him in there. The biggest athletic freak in the class. That would change the tone.
Yeah. I mean, he's still out there, so that the book isn't closed on that recruiting class. But right now, it looks like it's a little bit down from where Michigan's been. They're still trying to figure out NIL, as everybody is. So I think the window's open for Michigan to be good for a good stretch of time here. But they do need to capitalize on this. That last year, getting to that point, it opened some doors for Michigan that hadn't been open for a while. And now they have a chance to really take advantage of this and set themselves up for the future.
All right, guys, money question. What happens in this game? Austin, you go first. What do you think?
You know, I think that the thing I've said is like, is this going to look like a Big Ten game, or is this going to look like a Big 12 game? If it looks like a Big Ten game, then I think Michigan is in really good shape. And Michigan's ability to run the ball, you know, looking back at the Big 12 championship with TCU and Kansas State, I think there's probably some things Michigan saw in that game in terms of the way K-State was able to run on TCU that
And
they're
kept
probably
running just like Michigan does.
Yeah, probably thinking like, you know, that's our edge in this game. You know, we want to go out there and show, you know, what a Big Ten rushing offense looks like. So I tend to think that, you know, Michigan, having had the experience of being there last year and seeing what it takes, and, you know, just sort of the focus that this team has had really from day one. I tend to think that Michigan is going to be able, even without Blake Corum, which is a big question, but I tend to think, you know, with Donovan Edwards having a chance to get more healthy than he was late in the season, I tend to think Michigan's going to be able to run the ball well enough to get out of there with a win and go on to the national championship game.
Shadyville03 asks, is TCU satisfied just making it? TCU feels like Michigan last year, just happy to be invited. Sam, I imagine your experience with them says something a little different, but
I think they do it. They're certainly got a chip on their shoulder. I mean, because they're going to hear about. I mean, they heard people talking about them not even deserving to make the playoff for a long time until finally at the end, you know, it became inevitable. But so I think they're definitely going to be motivated. They're going to enjoy the experience. And I will tell you, Sonny Dykes does a good job of keeping his team on that even keel of, hey, we're gonna work hard, but we're also going to enjoy it. So they're definitely going to enjoy this. But I do think I tend to agree with Austin. I think the physicality that Michigan has up front and how good they are on the offensive line. This is the best offensive line TCU will have seen all year by far. And I think that's going to end up making the difference, because if TCU plays with their food a little bit, which they have a lot this year, and they end up having to come back and rally, Michigan's a team that can put you away if you do that. And so given that, and to further Austin's point about the experience, having done this already a year ago, having been through all this, I think that counts for something. I think that matters a little bit at the end of the day. So while I do think they match up well, TCU matches up well from a skill position standpoint, I think the battle in the trenches, I think, is where Michigan's going to have the edge. I think it's ultimately going to win them the game.
All right. I will be giving my pick on Friday in the Bowl Picks Extravaganza Part 3 with Ari and Nicole, because, you know, we got to make sure we really play up the Mayo Bowl. So we get that pick. And, yeah, we'll throw in the playoff games as well. Guys, this has been a pleasure. Travel safe to Arizona. I will be sending restaurant recommendations. I'll be in Atlanta, but I have a few places. I have a few spots. Went to a place last year where the quesadillas are 10 feet long and they give you scissors to cut them, and everybody gets a piece. And it's going to be marvelous. Don't just listen to Ari. That's all I'm saying. There's other folks to listen to. So, guys, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Andy.